They called us the perfect couple. The magazines, the guests at our charity galas, even the people who only knew us through glossy photos. Everyone believed our smiles were real. I used to believe them too. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, loved him deeply enough, he'd see me as his equal. But behind the picture perfect dinners and private jets was a silence that grew louder with every passing year. When we first met, I thought I had found safety, a man who saw my ambition and said he admired it. He would hold my hand and whisper, "We're building something no one can take away." And I believed him. Every contract he signed, every idea he presented, I was there, right beside him, writing, researching, creating. I was his sounding board, his editor, his quiet partner in every success. But somewhere along the way, I became invisible in my own story. He loved being seen as generous, as the man who lifted me up. He'd joke at dinners about how I used to be just a dreamer, as if I hadn't helped build the empire he was so proud of. I'd laugh along to keep the peace, even when my chest tightened at every word. Love can make you patient, but it can also make you forget your own reflection. The distance started small: missed breakfasts, unanswered texts, work trips that lasted longer than planned. Then came the perfume on his shirts, not mine, and the way he'd avoid my eyes when I asked simple questions. I told myself all powerful men got distracted sometimes, that he'd come back to me when things slowed down, but they never did. I remember one night sitting alone in the penthouse staring at our wedding photo. Me in white, him smiling like he'd conquered the world. And maybe he thought he had, but what he didn't realize was that I had built half of that world, and one day he'd regret forgetting it. Because the perfect marriage he flaunted in front of everyone, it was built on my devotion and his deception. I just didn't know yet how deep the cracks went, but I was about to find out. It started with a feeling, that strange, sinking weight in your stomach when something's wrong, but you can't prove it yet. He'd stopped kissing me goodnight, stopped calling me from business trips. Even his eyes looked different, colder, sharper, as if he'd already moved on in his mind. But I told myself I was imagining it. I'd been through too much with him to believe that the man who once promised me forever could be living a double life. Then one morning, while sorting through invoices for one of our companies, I noticed a new account name, unfamiliar, tucked between legitimate ones. A shell company with a feminine name, Aurelia Holdings. I remember the chill that ran through me. My instinct told me to dig deeper, but part of me didn't want to know. Still, curiosity and pain are a dangerous combination. I opened the files, and there it was, thousands of dollars transferred monthly to an offshore account, all linked to his so-called marketing consultant. I didn't need a photo to know who she was. When I confronted him, he didn't even flinch. He poured himself a drink, smirked, and said, "You're being emotional again. You wouldn't understand business." His tone was the kind men use when they want to make a woman feel small. But that night, I realized something powerful. I wasn't small. I was underestimated. And that was his mistake. The next day, I met quietly with our company's accountant, an older man who had known me since our first days of struggle. He hesitated before sliding a brown envelope across the table. "I shouldn't be showing you this," he whispered, "but you deserve to know." Inside were copies of contracts, property deeds, and patent filings, all under my name originally, but later edited to his. He had signed away my ownership, my ideas, my years of effort, everything I had built beside him. I walked out of that meeting trembling, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was focus. I started documenting everything: emails, files, text messages. Every lie had a paper trail, and every paper trail had a reckoning. He thought betrayal would break me. But what he didn't realize was that betrayal, in the right woman's hands, can become evidence. And so, the invitation came wrapped in gold, his signature touch. "For closure," the note said. I should have known better than to expect sincerity from a man who'd already replaced me in both his heart and his business. Still, curiosity, or maybe a quiet hunger for truth, pushed me to go. I needed to see the face of the woman he'd risked everything for. The restaurant was one of those places you had to book weeks in advance, filled with chandeliers and laughter that didn't quite sound real. When I walked in, heads turned, some out of pity, others out of curiosity. I spotted him instantly, smiling that same charming smile that used to melt my anger away. Only now, it was pointed at someone else. She sat beside him, draped in diamonds I recognized from our safe. My pulse quickened, but my face stayed calm. Years of being a billionaire's wife had taught me how to wear a mask. He stood to greet me, but not with warmth. "You look decent," he said, as if complimenting a stranger's effort. The woman giggled softly. That sound, sharp, rehearsed, almost cruel, echoed in my head. They ordered champagne, the same brand he used to save for our anniversaries. When the waiter poured, he raised his glass and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "To freedom, and to finding someone who finally understands me." Laughter rippled across the table. For a second, I thought I might cry, but the tears never came. Instead, something colder settled inside me, a quiet, steady strength. I smiled and lifted my glass too. "To truth," I said softly. He laughed, not realizing what those two words would come to mean. Dinner went on, and every word out of his mouth was meant to cut me down. He spoke about how some women forget their place, how he was done with emotional baggage. Each jab only sharpened my resolve. By dessert, I was done pretending. I slipped the signed document from my purse, a single page confirming his acknowledgement of my intellectual and financial contributions to his empire. He'd signed it years ago, thinking it meant nothing. Tonight, it meant everything. I placed it beside his plate, smiled once more, and whispered, "Enjoy your dinner. I'll enjoy the verdict." Then I stood, my heels clicking against marble as the room fell silent. That night, he celebrated his freedom. He just didn't know. It was the last toast he'd ever make at my expense. I would turn his empire of lies into my foundation for justice. I remember the sound of my heels echoing through the marble hallway that morning. Steady, unshaken. The press waited outside like vultures, cameras flashing, voices calling my name, asking if I was nervous to face him. But I wasn't nervous, not anymore. The woman who used to cry behind locked doors was gone. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his reckoning. He sat at the defense table, dressed in an expensive suit, arrogance stitched into every seam. His mistress sat behind him, pretending to be calm, though her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. I could feel their eyes on me when I took my seat beside my lawyer, a quiet, brilliant woman who believed in justice more than fear. She leaned toward me and whispered, "Just breathe. Truth speaks louder than money." The opposing lawyer started with rehearsed confidence, painting me as the emotional ex-wife who couldn't let go. The courtroom chuckled softly, including him. But then, my lawyer stood and placed a thick folder on the judge's desk. The paper trail I had collected, line by line, night after night, emails, bank transfers, company documents, patent records, all carrying my fingerprints. When she spoke, her tone was calm but cutting. "Your Honor, this woman didn't just stand beside the billionaire. She built the foundation he's standing on." He shifted in his seat. For the first time, he looked unsure. Then came the accountant's testimony. He admitted under oath that I was the original co-founder, the registered creator of the brand name and its intellectual property, until my husband illegally transferred ownership without consent. Gasps rippled through the room. The mistress's name surfaced in financial fraud documents. Her face drained of color. He turned to her, whispering something sharp, but the damage was done. The judge's gavel hit the desk once, the sound of power shifting. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, spine straight, heart steady, watching the empire he built on betrayal begin to crumble. When the judge adjourned, he glanced at me, but I met his gaze without blinking. He once said I'd never survive without him. That day in court, he finally understood. I was never surviving him. I was outgrowing him. The morning after the first court session, his face was everywhere. Headlines screamed words like fraud, betrayal, empire built on lies. Every news anchor had a new angle. Every investor had a new excuse to walk away. I didn't have to say a single word. The truth was speaking for me, louder than I ever could. He tried to control the narrative, of course, released a statement about a misunderstanding and a vindictive ex wife. But the documents were already public. Reporters dug deeper, uncovering years of financial manipulation, fake subsidiaries, and hidden accounts. The more he spoke, the worse it got. The empire he'd protected so fiercely began to crumble, one press release at a time. I remember watching one of the interviews from home, sitting in the same living room where I'd once begged him to just see me. Now, the world was seeing him, exactly as he was. The same reporters who once called me lucky were calling me resilient. It's funny how quickly narratives change when power shifts hands. His mistress wasn't spared either. She was spotted leaving his penthouse late at night, avoiding cameras with a scarf over her face. The tabloids turned on her too. The woman who had everything now looked hunted, hollow, and terrified. I heard she sold her jewelry to pay her lawyers, the same jewelry he once bought her with company money. Karma has an exquisite sense of timing. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. No interviews, no statements, no public appearances. I didn't need to shout my victory, Tad. Silence had become my most elegant weapon. My lawyer told me that his team had tried to settle privately, but I refused. I didn't want his money. I wanted accountability. One night, as I walked past a newsstand, I saw his picture again, but this time next to mine. The caption read, "From billionaire's wife to woman who exposed the truth." I paused for a moment, not out of pride, but out of peace. It was over. The pretending, the pleasing, the pain. He had built an empire on deceit. I rebuilt myself on integrity. And the difference between the two was now written across every headline. The exposure wasn't my revenge, it was his reflection. The day of the verdict felt strangely calm. The courtroom, once tense and buzzing, was silent, the kind of silence that comes before a storm ends. I sat there, hands folded, heart steady, while he paced beside his lawyer, whispering frantically. The judge entered, papers in hand, eyes unreadable. When she began to speak, the words felt like slow thunder. After reviewing all evidence, the court recognizes the plaintiff as the rightful co-founder and legal owner of the company's intellectual assets. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then it sank in. I had won. My lawyer squeezed my hand. Across the room, his face went pale. The judge continued, ordering him to transfer 60% of the company back to me, along with financial restitution for emotional and professional damages. The penthouse, the cars, the accounts, all awarded under rightful claim. The mistress's name was blacklisted in the fraud record. He turned to me, broken and desperate, whispering, "Please, we can fix this. You don't have to destroy me." I looked at him, the man who once called me his everything but treated me like nothing, and said quietly, "I'm not destroying you. I'm freeing myself." As cameras flashed outside, I walked through the courthouse doors into the sunlight. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was release. The chains he'd forged with charm and cruelty had finally fallen. That night, when reporters asked how it felt to take back everything he stole, I simply smiled and said, it was never about taking. It was about reclaiming. He once believed money made him untouchable. But I learned something far more powerful. Truth doesn't need wealth to win. It just needs patience. And I had waited long enough. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks or applause. It felt like quiet mornings with peace instead of panic. For the first time in years, I woke up without checking my phone, without wondering what disaster waited in my inbox. I was no longer the billionaire's wife. I was myself again, and that was more valuable than any fortune. I used part of the settlement to start a foundation for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. Not just financially, but emotionally. I met women who had lost everything, and together we discovered something powerful. When you've been broken, you don't rebuild the same. You rebuild stronger. One evening, as I stood on a stage speaking to a room full of survivors, I saw the light in their eyes. That same spark I'd once thought I lost. And I realized the real victory wasn't the company or the court case or the headlines. It was the woman I'd become through the fire. As the applause faded, I whispered to myself, he took my trust, but I took my power. Because that's the truth no one can rewrite. They can steal your name, your peace, even your love, but never your worth.